are people who make music for a living, and then there are people who live to make music. New York City's producer, engineer, and musician, Mark Plati, definitely falls into the latter category.
Thank you.
Mark began his career with a bang, working with dance music legend Arthur Baker in the late 80s. He then went on to work as a mixer and engineer for artists and producers as diverse as Quincy Jones, Janet Jackson, the Talking Heads, Fleetwood Mac, Lou Reed, the Fat Boys, and the Bee Gees. After working with Prince on the Graffiti Bridge album, Prince, Mark began his production career working on records for New Order, Suzanne Vega, Al Green, Big Audio, Dynamite, Sean Colvin, Raichi Sakamoto, and Delight. The groove is in his heart. In 1991, he began a 10-year stint at Philip Glass's New York City recording complex, The Looking Glass, where he produced, engineered, mixed, or performed on albums by The Cure, Duncan Sheik, Dave Navarro, and even Glass himself. I think it was around the Duncan Sheik album when we met, right? Sounds about right.
Yes, it was.
That is when it was, so I'll just say.
Way back.
It also brought him into David Bowie's orbit. In 1996, Mark co-produced and mixed David Bowie's Earthling album. A hand for Earthling. Finally getting some well-deserved props. The beginning of a 7-year association with David that included studio work on Hours, Heathen, Reality, and of course, Toy. From 1999 until 2003, Mark was David's musical director and also played guitar and bass in David's band. He shared the stage with David at Glastonbury, Net Aid, the Montreux Jazz Festival, VH1 Storytellers, the 9/11 concert for New York, and the Area 2 tour with Moby. He also supervised the live execution of 2 complete Bowie albums, 2002's Heathen and the 1976 classic Low. How many here were here at Roseland and saw Low live? 3 of us. All right. And Mark, you should raise your hand. In 2005, Mark began an extended period working in Paris, producing and mixing a number of iconic platinum European artists, and he continues that work to this day while also maintaining a studio here in New York City. It's there that Mark recently put the finishing touches on David Bowie's quote-unquote lost album, Toy. From recording sessions Mark produced and played on in 2000, please join me in welcoming Mark Plati.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're done. No.
See you, yeah.
So I'm going to start with the obvious. A lot of people will know this, and there were spoilers in my introduction, but talk a little bit about how you came into David's orbit.
Completely by accident.
That's the best way.
Like most things in music, things just happen organically, and he was coming to see a studio where I happened to have a room. He knew Philip Glass, and he was interested in Philip's room because it had not only technically outfitted nice and really well, but it had a nice window, and that was a real big plus. I know I mentioned that in the production notes, and I can't really overstate at that time how great it was to have a window in the studio.
Explain what recording studios are like for people who don't know.
I think I used the expression luxurious bunker.
Basically.
Because there'd be no daylight, you wouldn't know what time of day it was, but that really helped a lot. That was really a nice thing, and no studios had that then. And since I had a room there and I knew the place really well, I just got paired with them, and I thought it was going to be a couple of weeks, and it was a while, 7 years or something, a while.
So, but there was a song they wanted to work on that they'd started in Switzerland that eventually ended up on Earthling. So talk a little bit about that.
That was Telling Lies, and he had written it and was kind of starting to work on it, and we finished it off. And that's notable for being the first downloadable internet single, which at the time was
always ahead of the curve.
Yeah, we didn't know how that was going to go, but that kind of planted a seed for him and a lot of people. Like, wow, we can just do this. And now, of course, that's what life's like, isn't it?
Right.
Everybody's doing that. That's how life goes.
So you made the Earthling album. You worked on Hours. Talk about the working relationship. What he was like to collaborate with.
It was always a lot of fun. Sessions were always just humor. Working hard, but and as a person in the room, he got you there to do what you did. He kind of saw things in people like your talents or your personality, And once you were there, he just kind of let you loose, and to bring to it what you would bring. He would, channel you here and there, but it really was about that, and being like I felt like a collaborator, pretty straight off, actually, especially in the position I was in as a programmer, and creating loops and things like that, and since it had so much to do with the bed of that record, so. Pretty much from the get-go, felt like this working relationship was really, really good.
There's such a huge difference between Earthling and Hours. Did he have different methods of working? Was it always pretty much the same, even though the background, the bed tracks, as you say, were so different?
Pretty much. I mean, the thing about Hours that I really liked was that it was different. It was something else, and I was really ready for something else after doing.
Well, you were becoming known as the drum and bass.
As electronica guy.
Yeah.
Like, the industry wants you to be somebody that you can easily put in a box. And I was remixer guy, which I was really remixer. I love doing remixes, but I didn't come from dance world. I grew up in the 70s, and I came more from that world. And I didn't have the passion for dance music as far as, I know how to make it, but to create it and write in that, it wasn't really me. But then I got to be electronica person, which was fun, but after doing Earthling, I'd felt like I'd climbed that mountain.
Right. Where do you go?
Yeah, I didn't want to do it again, and but that's kind of what you get into. You get identified with a sound or something, and that's what you are supposed to do. And I was having my little existential crisis of, is this it? I'm just going to do this? And my whole life has been trying to avoid the treadmill, to avoid this kind of, repetition, and get stuck in a groove. And so when Hours came around, and Reeves called me, and he said, well, we are in the middle of working something and on something, and do you want to come in and play fretless bass on it? And I, lit up like a Christmas tree. I was like, that's exactly sort of what I need to do, is go there, or go there, or go there, just somewhere else. And of course, David is like the king of going somewhere else. So I was ready for the adventure to continue.
Let the guy who's been mixing the records play bass on the records.
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Well, I credit Reeves because I had played bass on Reeves' solo stuff, and Reeves knew about that. But David didn't know me in that capacity at all. At that point, I was programmer guy. But then once I got into the soup on Hours, then I started playing even a little acoustic guitar, which is what led to the next step, which was being in the Storytellers band.
Right. We'll get there.
Another
Hang on,
accident.
because I want to recap. I assume everybody knows all these players that we're talking about. But Reeves Goodbrels, who met David in the late 80s and ended up collaborating with him on Tin Machine and stayed over through Outside and Earthling and Hours. A great guitar player in his own right. Wrote a lot of songs
genius,
with David.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about their collaboration and their relationship that you got to observe up close. From an artistic standpoint. Now, I don't need to know what kind of sandwich Reeves likes.
It had avocados, I think. If I remember.
It was 90s.
Yeah. And wasabi mayo, maybe? I don't know. It was very 90s, yeah. They had a great relationship. I mean, as personal as well as musical. I mean, when I met them, they were pretty much like partners, and the three of us kind of were a little team together. We went to Ireland to do tour pre-production for the Earthling tour, and it was just the three of us for I think 2 or 3 weeks locked up in a room. And when you lock up boys in a room together, it just gets really silly really fast. You can't help it. And they had a great relationship, but again, it was kind of like letting Reeves go and do what he does, and Reeves always had great ideas, and David just let that happen. He would always have opinions and have kind of the overview. Like I remember the day in Looking Glass, when after we'd been working for a couple of days, and David said, the direction for Earthling, here it is. You know, he kind of arrived at it. It's going to be these electronic and drum and bass foundations with these melody-driven songs on the top. I remember clear as a bell. That was like, and then it was real easy.
Right.
Then we could go, oh yeah, cool, and then bring in this, and that fits, and that's why Earthling, even though it sounds really, I guess, complex in some ways, but it was really easy because, you know, you had the map.
Right.
And when you had a map like that, everybody could just do what they would do.
So you mentioned this, but it's significant to the story that at the time of Hours, which had more guitars, acoustic guitars, you know, more pop-esque or classic David Bowie sounding songs on it, he got asked to do Storytellers. And you ended up in the band.
How'd that happen?
So how did that happen?
Well, I knew they were going to do stuff like songs like Seven in the show and a couple other things with acoustic guitar. And I knew they would need somebody else just to do that, to do those songs. So I thought, you know, I could do that. One gig. That was the thought. I thought, I just want to play one gig. And then that's it. I'll go back in my little cocoon here in the studio. You know, I had no ambitions to be a touring person. Not at that point in my life or career or whatever. I had a kid and all that. And it was just one would be fun. And I suggested it to Reeves, and then, you know, they talked about it and said, yeah, it makes sense. I'm here. They know me. I can do it. And so, yeah, sure. It was, you know, a fun little idea. But then as things would happen with David, then it's like, oh, okay, you're cool there now.
Right. That's your job now.
Yeah, it's like he was like the casting director, and go, oh, you were good in this movie, but now in this movie you could be this guy. It was kind of like that. And then when Reeves left, the musical director slot was open, and he asked me to do it. And I said, can I do that? I don't know, John. I mean, I guess I could do that. And he's like, it's like being a producer, but you're on the bus. And yeah, okay, that makes sense. So sure, why not?
Was this, I have to imagine, you know, you're a young guy, you've got all this opportunity. At some point, you had to think to yourself, I remember when I was 15 years old learning the guitar, playing guitar in my bedroom at home, and now I'm playing with David Bowie. That has to cross your mind at some point.
Oh, a few times. Yeah, I think there was one point, there's one notable experience of that at Glastonbury or Roseland, one of those gigs where I'm in the middle of the triangle of David and Garson and Slick, and I have these flashes of like, I'm supposed to be doing this in my bedroom. I'm not supposed to be here. Why am I?
And you're giving them the cues.
And I'm directing traffic, right? It's crazy. And then I go, okay, I have to do my job. But there would be moments like that where, you know, or even the first week or two I worked with him, because this window at Looking Glass, the sun would come through, and you know, I'd be up front at the desk doing the thing, and I'd look back, and he'd be on the couch, and sometimes the sunlight would hit him in just the right way, and I'd just go, geez, it's Ziggy in the room. It would just be really freaky. And then I go back to work.
You know, you mentioned Glastonbury, but I want to go back to Storytellers, because the germ of Toy really came during Storytellers.
Yes.
How?
He wanted to talk about the mid-'60s, right? So he needed a song so that he could, you know, we all know what this show's about, where you play a song and describe why I wrote it, where I wrote it, what was happening in life, la, 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 right? So he wanted to talk about it. For me, as a 70s kid Bowie fan, I was highly unaware that there was a mid-'60s. I, you know, like most of us, thought Space Oddity on up. That's right, where it starts, and I hadn't even really thought about that. Or, you know, I knew there were recordings, but
you missed the Laughing Gnome, clearly.
I did. Can I have a little full disclosure? Still never heard it.
Really?
Still never heard it.
I'm bringing the Laughing Gnome and a peanut
Yeah.
butter sandwich for you next week.
I know something about it like says maybe I shouldn't. Or I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things
it's
like
in your future, Mark.
I'm leaving it for a moment, but I've never heard it. So I didn't know anything from this period at all. And so he was fishing around from a song, and I'm going to say, I hope I get this right, because as I go along doing these things and I say things and somebody calls and says, it was really this thing. And so I believe it was Reeves that found Can't Help Thinking About Me on a compilation that he had. And David was like, yeah, okay. It had the distinction of being, as everybody probably knows, the first David Bowie proper song, right, where he was
Not Davy Jones. But
yeah, or lower for third, none of that. Just David Bowie, 1966, which was appropriate too. But the song itself was this nice, cool, quirky mid-60s tune, but with that band, with Sterling and Gale, and it just had real, it had balls.
Well, it's funny because the original song at that time, you can hear that it was kind of a Who, Small Faces thing, which they did not capture. But
No.
when you guys played it, it became, and you got to tell that story about Stevie Marriott, and
Yeah,
which
it
was,
really served its function well. It
really
was
did.
nice, and the song sounded like that era.
Right.
It was perfect, as we would expect, right? It was, the perfect choice. And it was cool. It was a nice little moment. He was making fun of lyrics he wrote when he was 17 or whatever, and and great. And that was the end of it. But it wasn't the end of it because he really liked doing it. He got a kick out of doing it. And
it stayed in the set.
it did, and ended up lately they've been running this clip of the Paris show,
Right.
in October '99, and that was you could just see there. It's like you really had fun doing it, and it was around then. I'm gonna say I think we were in Dublin at some point, and Joe Elliott heard it and came backstage and said, that was really cool. Maybe you could do a couple more of those tunes because it's really got a different thing to it. And I don't know if that's what brought it on or helped it or had nothing to do with it. I don't know, but it was just a little indication of, hey, maybe. I don't know.
Well, and I have to imagine that had to be, because this is the end of 1999, Glastonbury had to be, management had to be thinking about the
I'm
next
sure,
summer,
yeah,
what
I'm
was
sure
gonna
they
happen next summer.
were, yeah. of
So,
course.
for anybody
They
who doesn't
plan
know,
these things a long time out.
yeah,
ahead.
for anybody who doesn't know, in the summer of 2000, David and the band played a huge show at Glastonbury. You can buy the DVD or vinyl somewhere, probably here. Mark was in the band, and that song, Can't Help Thinking About Me, wasn't in the set list, but you did play a gig at the BBC Theatre 2 days later, which is in the Brilliant Adventure box set, an expanded version of it, the complete set, I assume. And there's a couple of those songs that became Toy. So this idea is percolating, and the band is becoming the band. But you've mentioned everybody that was in the band to date, but you had a guitar change around that time that I have to say had to be fundamental to not just the Toy record, but the Glastonbury show, and making the band the band that we know as the classic lineup from the last part of his career. Talk a little bit about Earl Slick and the band at that time.
Right. Well, in early 2000, this idea of a 60s record, he brought me this idea, because at that time, the next record was going to be with Tony. They had already talked about that, and that was going to be it. But then he had this thought, well, maybe I want to do this thing first, just this quick little thing, 60s record, where we get a bunch of these songs from back in those days and do them together as a band. And just, for fun.
Right.
And, and would I do it? And I said, sure, that sounds like, and that was kind of like right in my wheelhouse, too.
Right.
That was sort of pretty much as far from dance remixing as one could get.
Live rock and roll in a room in a studio.
Yeah, it was a pretty, far off. And I had not done, a record like that maybe ever, because I grew up in like the multi-track era where, you know, oh, you get the drummer in and and you know, you occasionally do like a band record, but most of the recording I had done had been not like that at all. It'd all been the kind of piecemeal, and you know, or you have a singer and you get a band together for them. It happened, maybe they're session people, but not like an organic thing where we've got a band, they're rehearsed, we're bringing them in and we're going to bang it out. I mean, that was really, you know, that's how they used to do it.
And interestingly, you mentioned the downloadable single, the first downloadable single
Yeah.
early on. This was something he thought, he just assumed he could do it and put it out right away.
That was the idea, yeah. It was, you know, it was that kind of thing. It wasn't going to be not new songs, you know, it was just going to be this fun little
It wasn't going to be 8
yeah.
months of marketing. It was just to be...
No,
this
not
is-
at all. Yeah, that wasn't, you know, to my knowledge, it was nothing like that. I didn't see it that way because
Right.
there wasn't going to be this period of writing and figuring out like who should do it, you know, musicians, where and how. There was none of that. It was like, we're going to, you know, rehearse a band and do them, you know. He said, you and I'll choose some songs, get a group of them together. I'll like write out some charts for musicians, and when we rehearse for Glastonbury, we'll go over some of them,
Right.
just to like get them into it.
But by this time, Reeves had left.
Reeves had left before the Hours tour,
Right.
which is why I was even on the Hours tour. And they got Paige Hamilton to kind of sub for Reeves. But after that, he decided to bring Slicky back into the fold, which was a really, that was just a great thing. He was the guy. He was the perfect fit for, you know, for me and for every, just personality-wise, and his playing for that, it was perfect. It was just a, you know, David seemed to always bring in Slick at the right times, didn't he?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. And Glastonbury, for anybody who hasn't watched that show, you should tonight. It's a great a great way to celebrate his birthday. They're such foils for each other, not just Slick being
Yeah.
David's foil, but for each other.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It was funny because in rehearsal, like when he first came back, I mean, you can even see in the way that he looks, like he was just a little bit, you know, he's a little conservative. He's playing it a little bit, you know, not playing wise, but he's playing it a little safe and, you know, not getting out of his, you know, his shell too much. But especially in rehearsal.
For people who don't know, at this time, Slick had retired from the music business, at least in his mind, and was selling timeshares, right?
Yeah.
True story.
So he's getting his foot back into it, and he was being a...
Sure, I'll just go back and play
Yeah.
with David Bowie.
Yeah, he was a little hair tentative, you know, but not musically, but just kind of how far should I step out there and how wild should I look or what have you, you know. And then I remember at the first Roseland show, he's getting the feedback on for station to station. And I look over at him and he's like bent over the amp and he's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and I'm like, oh shit. All right, he's here. Now he's in the building, right? That was really cool. That was a cool thing to see him kind of like return full on, you know.
Well, he told me, this may or may not be true, but it's a good story, that the first day of rehearsals, he straps on his guitar, and he's getting warmed up, and he meets everybody, and David comes in, and you start playing Stay, and because you had been playing it, you started playing the riff. And David said, no, wait a minute.
I don't remember that.
Oh,
yeah.
and he said, this is the guy who
wrote it,
who wrote
did it,
let
yeah,
him play
let
it.
him do it.
You know,
Sure. Yeah,
we'll
because
go with that as true.
I suppose. I mean, the thing is, you know, sometimes the stuff is so long ago that some of these things, I'm sorry, they just get lost to time. You know, unless I wrote it down. I mean, thank God I wrote down extensive notes about the Toy album,
Right.
or I'd be lost on it. I wouldn't remember half of it.
And so Toy was happening. You knew it was happening. The band, you know, sort of knew that there were recording sessions coming up.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, they did.
But you come off Glastonbury and the BBC Theatre show. I think you did 3 songs that became from Toy at the BBC show. I think
we only did
2,
two.
3. Okay.
Yeah, we did.
And-
we did London Boys and I Think
That's it.
Everything. Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, that's end of June 2000.
Right.
And the sessions were in July and August. Talk a little bit about the high of coming off Glastonbury and whatever pre-production you and David had, with or without the band, going into the sessions, and what his ideas were for Toy.
The idea was pretty much basically to just go do it while the band was hot, while the band was, still firing on all cylinders.
Because you hadn't done a big tour, but you had rehearsed, what,
We
5 or 6
rehearsed
weeks?
extensively.
Yeah.
We had.
So the band was a band
The band was even already a band
before Slick.
before Slick got in it. So once he got into it, then it kind of just took off, really exponentially. Like, he was the straw that stirred that drink, no doubt. Yeah, because just all of a sudden, like, his guitar playing and mine really just clicked. I really kind of, I took more of the Carlos sensibility, since I actually kind of grew up in that,
Right.
in the New York area. We had actually Sterling and I we did a podcast where we discussed like growing up around here in the 70s and how all that kind of different music really just, you couldn't help but absorb it. And, I grew up listening to Carlos and Nile Rodgers and
Right.
guitar players like this, so it kind of like was stuck in there already, what to do. So then playing against Slick, it was like, oh, of course, I just do that. It was already kind of, some of those songs were in the DNA as well, like, so it was quite a nice natural fit to be his wingman, I suppose.
And coming off of Glastonbury, David had to feel, not just excited by how good it was, but he had to have that sort of just the right amount of artistic energy and kind of ego to go into a project like that.
To go into Toy.
Yeah.
I was just a happy camper. I don't know how else to say it. Just he was in a great place.
Yeah.
Everybody was in a great place. But, when you've got the leader of the whole thing in a great place, that just, raises the floor of all of that. And, yeah, after Glastonbury, and then, this is before, Lexi's going to be born. This is like a great time.
Yeah.
Right? And that just, we all fed off of that. Everybody was in a great place. It's funny when I listen to it now and think, what would it have been like if we'd have waited a month and done it? Or even a week or whatever. I don't know. It's just sort of, when you get a mood like that, you really have to get it. Because I don't know if anybody's musical or recording experience, but sometimes like all it takes is one. It takes just one person to not be in sync and throw a spanner in the works or something, or somebody's musical head to be somewhere else. That's all it takes. But this wasn't like that. Everybody was just on a real common thread together. And for me, as a producer, I was like thrilling, because I'd just never been able to do that. I hadn't had the opportunity to really do that with a band like that.
Did you have any as the producer, did you have any qualms about the material? Because they were, the original versions of the songs are not remotely what ended up on the album itself. Could you imagine it sounding like that in your head?
I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I kind of knew that with this group of people,
Sure.
we'd get something. And after doing 2 records with him, I knew we'd get something. I
Yeah.
didn't know what it would be, but I knew we would get something.
Right.
So I wasn't so worried about that. And I liked a lot of the songs, especially once I kind of got my head around them. And what I found interesting from these early songs is he's already who he's going to be.
I know, it's amazing.
He's already there. Like, he's taking these chances in these songs, and it's like, as an
18-year-old kid,
you're
it's
like,
crazy.
he's
Yeah.
breaking these rules, and it's like, wow, he's done it already.
Yeah.
We think of, and so I was quite into it, actually.
So you end up at Sear Sound, which for people who don't know here is an amazing studio, and which is known for its analog gear and its tape machines, but you're working digitally.
We are working digitally,
Right.
yes. Well,
And-
that's the thing. We were not going to go back.
Right.
after this experience of, me editing and doing all that, and we're not going back to tape after that. He was not going to do that. So we're doing digitally in this fantastic world-class analog studio. And we're using all the great mics and preamps on the desk and all that, but we're going digital so that we can, I can do really on-the-fly quick edits and auditions of things, and which was really funny because it did not impress the owner of Sear, Walter Sear, who was one of the analog gurus of the universe. He was funny. Sometimes he'd just walk in to hang out, he'd turn his head,
computer,
and he'd just shake his it's like, poor Walter. But we were not trying to make, that was the other thing, not trying to make a retro kind of statement, or in no way were we trying to recreate what was as well. So it was like, we're going to use modern recording and editing techniques. Why would get the analog sound on something that was already there? That wasn't the idea.
So you're in the studio. You've got the whole band, as we remember it from that period of his career. And David, describe, put us in the room with you guys. What the sessions were like, what the mood was like in the studio, how you approached the songs, what his working methods were. Was he doing the vocals live? Just talk a little bit about how the nuts and bolts of the record happened.
Yeah, we just set up in Sear Sound, the big room on whatever floor that was. Sterling, Gail, myself, Mike's, the five of us in there. David was singing in a large vocal booth off to the control room. I had made little charts so people could have a map of the songs. We'd play them, the original, just to get a feel, just to hear them, but not enough to learn them, not enough to get familiar with, a part or something. Unless there was something like, all right, maybe we'll try that part just to have it. There was none of that. There was not trying not to pay attention to those, because the idea was, again, these people in this room, what are they going to do with it? Where are they going to take it? Where's Gail going to go with it? Gail, geez. Gail on this record's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's ridiculous how great she is.
Gail does not remember this.
Okay, well,
Well, because it was so fast.
Right, sure.
Because it was like a couple of weeks or whatever for her, and just coming in, banging out a couple songs a day, da-da-da, and done. So she had very little memory of doing this, because usually a record's a longer process, and you're finding parts and whatever, but there was no process to this. There was just like coming in and playing with your friends. It was basically that.
And all due respect to Gail, who does shine throughout this, everybody has their moment, don't they?
They do. They do, but it's also one of these sort of, the sum is definitely greater than, because it's just everybody's on a wavelength together, which again is, I often wonder if it had been the same. Or if we'd done the songs in a different order. I don't know. There's all these little mysteries, aren't there, with music? Like, if somebody had the wrong breakfast, or I don't know. There's all these things that, music is like, I still haven't figured it out, which is cool. I'm glad that I haven't. It's still, there's that's one mystery, is I think one commodity that I think we still kind of need a little bit. So I like that. I don't know sometimes why I play something one day and then I play it another day. It's like, got so much better today.
Right.
Why is that?
Right.
I don't know.
So you're basically doing, if you're only there for 2 weeks, you're basically doing 2 songs a day.
Yeah.
That's for people who don't know, that's
yeah.
very fast.
We weren't trying to break any records or, do the Beatles' first album or nothing like that,
What? But that is pretty quick. I mean, what was David like on a day-to-day basis? Were there days where you didn't get anything, or were there days that were less productive than others for one reason or another?
I don't know, because I didn't do like a daily diary of what happened.
Come on, Mark, you were there.
I think I was there. I don't know, but it was just, I don't remember any sort of day where, oh God, that didn't work. There was no day like that. It was just, Oh, it seemed to kind of even snowball, like it just sort of, as we got more used to the room and Pete, our engineer, it just seemed to, I don't know, kind of have a real upward kind of arc.
Let's go back to talking about each individual player, because everybody does have their highlight. We haven't talked about Mike Garson very much, who doesn't sound like the Mike Garson we all know and love on this record, and yet what he plays is perfect.
Perfect.
Shadow Man, particularly,
Perfect.
Right. So talk a little bit, let's go through each player and talk about maybe some highlights that you remember, or songs where people really sort of rose to the occasion.
Well, Shadow Man for
there,
Mike,
yeah.
of course. Also what he does in Conversation Piece.
Right.
He does these delicate little fills, little rising thing, and it's just
simple.
simple. Yeah, Mike really went down the simple road.
Right.
And I didn't ask him to. It was not like that. It just, again, more like this is how everybody felt it, and he did organ on London Boys.
Not his first instrument.
It was really, and he actually did this ridiculous organ part on Heat of the Morning, which is fantastic. It's like this mad circus organ he did. Yeah, he just came up with these really interesting yet simple parts. Like in Let Me Sleep Beside You, he's got this little subtle Rhodes part, which just kind of sets off these chords. They're sort of, pretty normal chords, but the way he's voiced them, it takes them a little bit off to the left side, but given the sound of it, it's not so prominent, so it's just
Right.
like a little flavor. So even sometimes choosing the right sound was, that was his idea.
Right.
So yeah, really interesting.
Hats off to Mike.
Worked from Mike on that.
And Sterling channeling his inner Keith Moon on this record.
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause,
He is the glue.
yeah, he really, he really brought it, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any particular moments that, he starts off one song a la 5 Years. That was one thing you said he brought to the table.
I don't know how. I think he just started playing it. There was a little bit of that going on, where somebody would just start playing something, and then somebody else would jump in. That was another Mike thing too, where we'd play a song, get to the end, and Mike would just start playing again.
Keep going.
Yeah, playing something, and we'd all jump in, just to jam, just to do it, just for fun. And there's one of those we kept at the end of You Got a Habit of Leaving. Like the band comes back in, we kept that one because it was just it was just such an organic thing. There was another one that was so long we chopped it up and made it into a different song.
Right.
So that's Mike.
So you have Toy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's Mike that did that.
Right.
But everybody was along for the ride on those. I don't know why he started playing that beat at the beginning of Conversation Piece, or what inspired him to do it. But then people just fell in with it. Yeah, that was kind of a typical thing where somebody just start doing something and everybody just follow along and run with it.
I want to talk about David's vocals, but the background vocals are also, they're so hooky and present and perfect, and really elevate all of the songs. Talk about Holly and Em, because we haven't talked about them at all, and we should.
I know. Well, they started doing that on the tour before that, on the Hours tour. They started coming up with these background parts. Like they had a great part on Always Crashing in the Same Car. And they had good ones on Can't Help Thinking About Me as well. So they just kind of followed along with that, they let that sort of lead where they were going. And it just brought this whole other color to it. It was interesting when mixing it. I was sometimes like, sometimes when you're mixing, you're like, wow, should I make the drums louder or whatever? How should I treat this thing? But that was sort of like, I wanted them in and just finding the right place for them without being too much or too little, but they really are important, you know. So that was one of the more interesting things about it, because they're really just a big part of that atmosphere, and they offset like the whole Keith Moon-ish sort of thing as well.
Yeah.
In a nice way.
And they give it that 60s thing without it being retro, too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I don't want to forget to talk about Lisa Germano, who adds so much to the tracks. Just talk about, it came later, but talk a little bit about what she added to them.
That was just another accident. While we were on this little break, before coming back to finish up, I saw her. She was doing her own solo. She had she was a solo artist, but she was playing with the Eels. And our engineer, Pete Kepler, who was, he was a live engineer for the most part. He was the Eels' live sound engineer. And they were playing somewhere in New York. I don't remember the space, the room. And he said, I'm here, I'm with the Eels. Do you want to come to the show? And I like the Eels. Sure, yeah, I'll come see it. And she was sitting in with them, and she's playing violin and singing and playing accordion, all stuff. And I just thought, wow, that's an interesting element. I wonder, some of these songs, maybe she could add a couple things to a couple songs, just to add a little extra color, make it a little less on the conventional rock front, just see what happens. So I suggested it to David, sent over a couple of CDs, and in typical kind of fashion, she was on a plane 2 days later, and came to my studio in New York with her little bag of tricks and stuff, and I thought, do a couple songs, and she ended up playing everything, and came back again for another session. That was really amazing, because when he would you could see like he'd meet a kindred musical person, spirit or what have you, and he's just, try this now, and just like, and my job as producer was to shut up. It's just like, all right, hit record, la la la, I'll make tea, whatever, just the process, let it go. You do your thing, I'm staying out of it, That was my role. Let them do it. And that was a wonderful little, magic session. And she adds this really interesting kind of, fiddle, Americana edge to it, especially like in the unplugged sort of songs. It's really like hearing David against that backdrop. I don't know that you get that anywhere else in the in
Good
the Bowie,
segue
in the Bowie canon, right? You don't really kind of hear that sort of sound.
But a perfect segue, because I wanted to talk about Slick's playing on the album, but also how the somewhat slightly electric disc would not exist if it were not for his Rolling Stones inspiration. So talk about his playing on the record itself, but also how the unplugged and somewhat slightly electric disc came about.
Right. Well, yeah, doing the recording, just recording the basic takes, we'd go through the songs and he'd have a part and I'd fashion a part against his, or if I was playing like an electric 12-string part, he'd play off of that. And that was a really easy process, actually, for me to fit into his thing or vice versa. So we'd get our parts together, run a take together, and then after we'd be finished, he'd say, "Hey, Marky," as he would. Let's put acoustic guitars on the song. Just run it. You and I just go in there, each playing an acoustic guitar, to play along with it. It'll add a little extra texture. It's like a Stones trick or whatever.
Did you do them facing each other live?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just went and did them together.
Which is an important
yeah.
part.
Yeah. So you can kind of feel
Play
off
off
each
each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I was, sure. Why not? It's going to take 5 minutes, whatever.
Why not?
We're not watching the clock here. It's like whatever. That was the other thing about, like, once we get a basic take, it was kind of time for anybody that had a thought or an idea to go, ooh, I have this thought, and go and try it. That's why, if we weren't doing that, we'd have done 3 songs a day. But
Right.
it was more like, okay, let's take a moment and just see somebody's got about adding a little lead part here or something. So that would be something we would do on every song, add like these acoustic guitars just to play along with it, be part of the texture. He said maybe we'll hear them, maybe we won't. But
it wasn't taking mixes home and coming back to it 3 weeks later. It was very much like on the floor, in the moment, right there. I've got an idea.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was right there, yeah. So we did that. And then later down the road, when mixing it, when you bring up tracks when you're mixing, and hear what the vocal sounds like with this gear on it or whatever, and then how does that sound against the drums, blah, blah, blah. You get these various combinations of things just to see how they work together. And at one point, I had up just David's voice and these acoustic guitars. And he's sitting back on the old looking glass couch, as it were, looking like Ziggy in the sun. And says, "Oh, what's that?" I said, "What's your voice with the acoustic guitar?" I said, "That's cool. Why don't we just print some like that? Let's just do some passes, like maybe they'll be useful. That's cool." Like, all right. So, and then
Good idea, boss.
yeah, and I started doing a little, combination of him with the background vocals sometimes or whatever. Just, and it was a really fun thing to do, except that I didn't do all the songs because I guess that came up later in the process. So I didn't do it for, I don't know, 3/4 of the songs. When we were, getting all this stuff together to make the box, they suggested me, Warner suggested to me, well, we found these acoustic mixes, but where are the rest? And I said, well, I don't think I ever did them. And they said, why don't you do them now?
Yeah.
Just because it's a cool, cool idea. So, all right, so I finished the thought, 21 years later.
And for anybody who hasn't heard it or hasn't bought the box set, which shame on you, you should buy the box set. The 3rd disc is made up of this sort of alternate album. That's an unplugged version of the record, which is absolutely astonishing.
It just has a whole other personality
It
to
does.
it,
It does.
It's really interesting. It's like, yes, it's the same songs and the same vocals, but I don't know, it's just got a whole different ambience to it. Which
And
is
you and
pretty
Slick
cool.
do sound great, but what I and Lisa really adds a lot to it, and
Yeah.
everybody is there in bits and pieces. There's electric guitars, and Mike shows up here and there, but David sounds fantastic. You can really appreciate his vocals, which are the same vocal takes from the original record.
Right.
They sound completely different because the bed is completely different.
True.
Yeah.
That's true. But his vocals on this record are just, they're astounding. I mean, a lot of them are just first take, with the band, just this level of excitement.
I want to sort of touch on that because, you said to me once that if Black Star was sort of the funeral record, then Toy really is the record for the party afterward.
I
And
suppose.
you did say that to me,
I did.
but I thought about it because today, listening to it yesterday and listening to it today in preparation for this, I was thinking, this is, it's his 75th birthday. Rather than think about him being gone, this is a guy who is happy, joyous, present, singing his pants off on this record.
Yeah.
It's really a great 75th birthday present. But talk a little bit about what he was like when he was doing those vocals and what his voice was like when it was just you and him, or you
Right.
with the engineer in the studio doing takes. Was it take after take after take, or how did he work?
No, not at all. See, the thing about this record is the songs were written. They were done. So it wasn't like in the usual process with David or any artist where it's like, well, how do I sing this song? What feeling am I looking for? There was none of that. There was no searching involved because he knew how it had to go. So it was more about just like, it was about performance. That was something, when I began to play with him, that was something I really picked up on, was how, in a live situation, how he connected the energy and what he put into singing, and how that was different from working in the studio, which is typically different for most singers.
But you said to
know.
me as a producer, that was your goal
I
on
just
Toy
thought
and
I
trying
wanna,
to capture
yeah,
that live
I want to
energy.
get that. That's I think all right. If I have a job on this record or whatever, a purpose or, I want to get that. I want to get this feeling of like abandonment in front of an audience and just surrendering to the song or whatever, however you want to define that. But just like being in the moment of a song, and. Pete, the engineer, has a good quote, which was in mix about because he really had a full-on view of David. I didn't see him as clearly because I was in with the band and kind of bouncing off of them and stuff. But he said David would just be, he said he noticed one time David was like 10 feet off the mic and just singing his heart out. And Pete swore well, he sounds like he's right on the mic. He sounds like he's right here, but he's like way back in the room, just like, just
Belting it out.
going for it.
Yeah.
And that's something like you can really hear it, I think,
And you don't always get that from an artist, do you?
Not in the studio, you don't, because well, the thing is he's also been doing it quite a while at this point, so he's not going to get like red light disease, where it's like, oh God, I'm recording. He's not going to have anything close to that. He's way beyond. But still, a studio can be an artificial, sterile environment, sure. and it's not like performing. So it's really, to be able to kind of let your hair down and do that in a studio, you need something, to kind of push you. And it was like the band pushed him, like he was, in the band. But he was a band sort of singer, no doubt.
He liked being in a gang.
He liked being in a band. I mean, it wasn't like kind of a singer that could have like, all right, well, this drummer, that drummer, whatever will work, or I could sub out, like, you sub out I don't know if anybody to sub out means like, well, this guy can't make it that day. I can get this guy to come in and just read the charts and do it. But no, that wasn't going to work. Like David would choose a band for, an album cycle or for longer, as long as whatever, it fit the mood. So like having the right set of people around him was part of it, and like I said before, he'd feed off of our energy and vice versa. And that was really, critical to being in a band, that's correct, that's right. But to do that in a studio it's not as easy as when you're doing it in front of an audience and you've got the, this electricity of having, people in a crowd and an audience to feed off of. So the fact that we got it to feel like that was, that was pretty cool for me.
Pretty
I gotta
cool.
say, it was really great.
I am going to leave some time for questions from the audience, but I want to ask Mark to wrap it up with one thought of his own. It has to feel really good that for one reason or another that he couldn't release it as immediately as he wanted to. It just never came out. It has to feel good that even if it's bittersweet, that Toy is now out there for people to hear. What's sort of your best memory of David and Toy and that moment in his career and your career?
I don't know. I've been getting asked that a lot, and I can't really sum
It's
it
how
up.
we wrap these things up.
Yeah, I can't really sum it up in a nice metaphor or
Teeing it up. You can say anything you want.
or in a perfect experience. It's more just I don't know. It's like a memory of a particular time period where everything just clicked.
It's that golden summer.
It is kind of,
Yeah.
and it had a lot to do with us, and it had a lot to do with the world
Right.
at the time. I mean, in the summer of 2000, life was grand, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
It was pre-9/11.
But and every
all
member of the
that,
band says exactly the same thing.
Yeah, there was just something really, it was the year 2000, man. Everything was, the flying cars were going to be there any minute now, right? Everything was going to, everything was great.
The internet is a good thing.
We beat the Y2K bug. Everything's going to be cool, right? That was, at least in the Western world, right? All right, we've nowhere to go but up. And,
Of course.
It was a very optimistic time,
Right.
right? For everybody.
Right.
And, unlike after that where, it's interesting, I think about like the Heathen band, right? The Heathen band became, with Jerry and then Catherine, this expanded kind of sonic palette, and we could be a lot darker, a lot like, you know, it's just going, and that really fit those times, right? It really, I didn't even think about it, you know.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I'm sure he did.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
no,
but
no.
I didn't think about, like, that really fit those times.
Because he did delve into different material.
Yeah, and doing low, that really fit that time.
Yeah.
But then, like, that band couldn't have played Toy,
Right.
and the Toy band couldn't have played low.
Right.
You know, not only the personnel involved, but just the times.
Right.
You know,
right.
it really struck me like, yeah, the
Low
times
would have
had a
felt
lot to do
totally
with it.
out of place in the summer of 2000 and felt perfect
Totally
in
out of
2002,
place.
didn't it?
Exactly. It was just right for that moment.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, it's
Post
funny.
9/11 moment.
You
yeah.
realize, like, you know, David was pretty damn good at figuring out the moments, right? Like, this is when, this now is the time for this, or for this, or for this. Like, you know, because now it's funny, it took me 20 years to figure that out, but, but it's like.
Well, when you're in the
yeah.
moment, you're not thinking these things. What does this mean?
No, you're just trying to do the job.
When I
and
do,
the
20
thing,
years from
yeah.
now, when I do the Q&A,
How's that gonna? Yeah.
how do I wrap up that?
What am I gonna bring to that? You know?
I want to thank Mark Plati. Let's give Mark a hand.
Thank you.
The Bowie Pop-Up Store, the Estate, Warner Brothers ISO for having us here. And also, let's say happy birthday one more time to David Bowie. Happy birthday, David. Thanks a lot, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Put on your red shoes and dance the blues. Let's dance to the song.